Bear cub, spinning on an airport baggage carousel. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in Terminal C, casting their harsh white glow across the polished floors where hundreds of travelers rushed past with their rolling suitcases. The familiar sounds of airport chaos filled the air, announcements echoing through speakers, the rumble of luggage wheels, and the distant hum of jet engines. But something was different this morning, something that would change everything. Zara Mitchell pushed her baby stroller through the crowded terminal, her 6-month-old daughter Aria gurgling softly as she played with a small stuffed elephant. The flight to Denver had been delayed by 3 hours, and Zara's patience was wearing thin. She needed coffee badly. The baby had been fussing all morning, and the stress of traveling alone with an infant was beginning to show. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart," Zara whispered to Aria, whose bright blue eyes seemed to be taking in every detail of the bustling world around her. The baby had always been unusually alert, watching everything with an intensity that sometimes unnerved even her own mother. As they approached the baggage claim area, Zara noticed a small crowd gathering near Carousel number 7. People were pointing and murmuring, some pulling out their phones to record whatever had caught their attention. She slowed her pace, curiosity getting the better of her exhaustion. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong in an airport terminal. A soft, plaintive whimpering that made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't human, but it wasn't exactly animal either. It was something in between, something desperate and afraid. Zara maneuvered the stroller closer to the crowd, standing on her tiptoes to see over the shoulders of the people in front of her. What she saw made her gasp and cover her mouth with her hand. On the slowly moving baggage carousel, spinning in endless circles, was a small bear cub, no bigger than a house cat, with thick brown fur that was now matted and disheveled. The tiny creature stumbled and slipped with each rotation, its small paws scrambling for purchase on the smooth black conveyor belt. Every few seconds, a piece of luggage would bump into the cub, sending it tumbling before it managed to right itself again. The crowd watched in a mixture of fascination and horror, but no one seemed to know what to do. Some laughed nervously. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few security guards stood at the edge of the group, speaking into their radios with urgent voices. "How did it get there?" someone whispered behind Zara. "Poor little thing," another voice said. "Someone needs to turn off that carousel." But the carousel kept moving, and the cub kept spinning, its small cries growing more desperate with each passing moment. The animal's dark eyes darted frantically around the terminal, searching for something, someone, anything that might help. Zara looked down at Aria, who had gone completely still in her stroller. The baby's usual happy babbling had stopped, and she was staring intently at the spinning cub with an expression that seemed far too serious for such a young child. Her tiny hands gripped the edges of her blanket, and her breathing had become quick and shallow. "It's okay, baby," Zara murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to her daughter or to the frightened cub on the carousel. "Someone will help." But as the minutes ticked by and the crowd continued to grow, it became clear that no one knew how to help. The security guards were waiting for animal control, the maintenance crew couldn't figure out how to stop just one carousel without shutting down the entire baggage system, and the airport staff seemed more concerned about liability than about the terrified animals spinning endlessly before them. The cub's cries were getting weaker now, and Zara could see that the poor creature was exhausted. How long had it been spinning? How had it even gotten there in the first place? The questions swirled in her mind. But what bothered her most was the look in her daughter's eyes. Arya was no longer just watching the cub. She was studying it, her baby face scrunched up in concentration as if she was trying to solve some impossible puzzle. Her small hands had begun to move, reaching toward the carousel even though they were still dozens of feet away. And then, just as Zara was about to turn the stroller around and walk away from the disturbing scene, Arya did something that made everyone in the crowd fall silent. The baby opened her mouth and let out a sound that wasn't quite a cry and wasn't quite a call. It was something deeper, something that seemed to come from a place beyond her 6 months of existence. The sound carried across the terminal, cutting through the noise and chaos like a knife through fabric. The bear cub stopped its frantic scrambling and turned its head toward the sound. For a moment that felt like an eternity. The small animal and the human baby locked eyes across the spinning carousel. And in that moment, Zara realized that whatever was about to happen would change all of their lives forever. The bear cub's eyes stayed fixed on Arya, and something impossible happened. The tiny creature stopped trying to escape the moving carousel. Instead, it sat down right there on the black conveyor belt, its small body swaying gently with the motion, but its gaze never leaving the baby's face. The crowd around them grew completely silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. Zara felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen anything like this before. Arya was still making that strange sound, not crying exactly, but something that seemed to come from deep inside her tiny body. It was almost like she was trying to communicate, trying to tell the cub something important. "What is she doing?" Zara whispered to herself. But her voice carried in the sudden silence, and several people turned to look at her and the baby. An elderly man standing next to them shook his head slowly. "I've never seen anything like this," he said quietly. "It's like they're talking to each other." The security guards had stopped speaking into their radios and were now watching the scene with the same fascination as everyone else. One of them, a tall woman with short gray hair, stepped closer to Zara. "Ma'am, is your baby always this responsive to animals?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. Zara looked down at Arya, who was still reaching toward the carousel with both hands now, her little fingers opening and closing as if she was trying to grab something that wasn't there. I don't know," Zara admitted. She's never been around wild animals before. I mean, we have a cat at home, but she's never acted like this. The carousel continued its slow rotation, carrying the bear cub in its endless circle. But something had changed in the animal's behavior. Instead of the frantic panic from before, there was now a strange calmness about it. The cub kept its eyes on Arya, and every time it passed directly in front of the baby, it would make a small sound. Not the desperate crying from before, but something softer, almost like a greeting. People in the crowd began pulling out their phones, recording the extraordinary interaction. But Zara barely noticed them. All her attention was focused on her daughter, who seemed to be having some kind of conversation with a wild animal that should have been impossible. "Mama?" Arya said suddenly, clear as day. Zara's breath caught in her throat. Arya had never said a real word before. She had babbled and made sounds, but never anything that could be understood as actual speech. And now, in the middle of this surreal situation, her first word wasn't just any word. It was calling for her. But Arya wasn't looking at Zara when she said it. She was still staring at the bear cub, her tiny hand stretched out toward the moving carousel. And as impossible as it seemed, the cub responded to the sound by standing up on the belt and taking a small step toward the edge of the carousel, toward Arya. "Oh my God," someone in the crowd gasped. "It's trying to get to the baby." The security guard stepped closer to Zara. "Ma'am, I think we need to move you and your daughter back. This situation is getting unpredictable." But before Zara could respond, something else happened that made everyone freeze in place. The bear cub, still standing on the moving carousel, raised itself up on its hind legs and placed its front paws against the rubber side of the conveyor belt. It was trying to climb off, trying to reach Arya. The crowd took a collective step backward, but Arya did the opposite. She began to struggle in her stroller, pushing against the safety straps that held her in place. Her small body was filled with a determination that Zara had never seen before, as if every fiber of her being was focused on one single goal: getting to that bear cub. "No, sweetheart, no," Zara said, reaching down to hold Arya still. But the baby was surprisingly strong for her age, and she continued to push against the restraints with an urgency that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. The carousel made another full rotation, bringing the cub past them again. This time, the small animal managed to get one paw over the edge of the belt, but it lost its balance and tumbled backward, rolling until it hit a large suitcase that knocked it toward the center of the carousel. Arya's response was immediate and devastating. She let out a cry that was unlike anything Zara had ever heard from her daughter. It wasn't the normal cry of a baby who was hungry or tired or uncomfortable. This was the cry of someone who was watching another being suffer, someone who understood pain and wanted desperately to stop it. The sound cut through the terminal like a siren, so loud and so filled with emotion that people throughout the baggage claim area turned to see what was happening. Travelers who had been focused on their own problems stopped what they were doing and began walking toward the crowd around Carousel 7. And then, as if Arya's cry had triggered something, other sounds began to fill the terminal. Somewhere in the distance, Zara could hear what sounded like more animal noises. Not human sounds, not the normal sounds of an airport, but something wild and urgent. The security guard was speaking rapidly into her radio now, her voice tense. "We need animal control here immediately, and I think we might need backup. This situation is escalating beyond what we can handle." But even as she spoke, Zara noticed something that made her blood run cold. The bear cub on the carousel wasn't alone anymore. Standing at the far end of the baggage claim area, partially hidden behind a large pillar, was another bear. Much larger than the cub, with dark brown fur, and eyes that were scanning the crowd with an intelligence that was unmistakably protective. The mother bear had found her way into the terminal. Zara's hands tightened on the stroller handle as she realized the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about a lost bear cub spinning on a carousel. This was about a family that had been separated, about a mother searching for her child in a place where neither of them belonged. And somehow, impossibly, her own baby daughter was right in the middle of it all, connected to these wild animals in a way that defied every law of nature and logic that Zara had ever known. The mother bear took a step closer to the crowd, and Zara could see that despite her size and obvious strength, there was something almost desperate in her movements. She wasn't trying to attack or threaten anyone. She was trying to reach her cub, just like Arya was trying to reach both of them. But as the security guards noticed the larger bear and began calling for immediate evacuation of the area, Zara realized that the situation was about to become much more dangerous. In a matter of minutes, this terminal would be filled with panic, with people running and screaming, with tranquilizer guns and capture nets. Unless something changed very quickly, the story wasn't going to have a happy ending for anyone involved. Arya seemed to sense the approaching chaos too. She had stopped struggling against her straps and was now sitting perfectly still, but her eyes were moving between the spinning cub and the approaching mother bear with an awareness that seemed impossible for a 6-month-old child. And then she did something that made Zara question everything she thought she knew about her own daughter. Arya reached into her blanket and pulled out the small stuffed elephant she had been playing with earlier. But instead of hugging it or putting it in her mouth like she normally did with her toys, she held it up in the air toward the carousel, toward the spinning bear cub, as if she was offering it as a gift. The cub saw the gesture and stopped moving entirely. For a moment, the only sound in the terminal was the mechanical hum of the carousel and the distant approach of more security personnel. And in that moment of perfect stillness, Zara finally understood what her daughter had been trying to tell her all along. And this wasn't just about helping a lost animal. This was about family, about love, about the bonds that connect all living things in ways that words could never explain. But understanding it and knowing what to do about it were two completely different things, especially when she could now hear the heavy footsteps of the mother bear getting closer, and the urgent voices of security guards preparing for the worst. The mother bear was now only about 50 feet away from the crowd, moving with a careful but determined pace. Her massive head swayed from side to side as she searched for the best path through the maze of luggage carts and scattered suitcases that littered the terminal floor. People were starting to notice her presence, and the whispers were growing louder. "There's another one," someone hissed. "A big one." "We need to get out of here," another voice said, filled with panic. But Zara found herself frozen in place, not from fear, but from the realization that running away might be the worst thing they could do. The mother bear wasn't moving like a predator stalking prey. She was moving like a parent desperate to reach her child, and Zara understood that desperation better than anyone in that terminal. The security guard who had been speaking to her grabbed Zara's arm gently but firmly. "Ma'am, we need to evacuate this area immediately. That's a full-grown bear, and we have no idea how aggressive she might become." "Wait," Zara said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Look at my daughter." Arya was still holding up the stuffed elephant, but now she was doing something even more extraordinary. She was making a soft, rhythmic sound. Not crying, not babbling, but something that sounded almost like singing. A low, gentle melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her tiny body. The bear cub on the carousel had stopped spinning. Not because the machine had stopped, the conveyor belt was still moving, but because the small animal had somehow managed to position itself in a way that it was moving with the belt instead of being carried helplessly by it. The cub was now facing Arya directly, sitting perfectly still as if listening to her impossible song. And most remarkably of all, the mother bear had stopped walking toward them. She stood about 30 feet away, her massive head tilted to one side, also listening to the melody that was flowing from the human baby. "I don't understand what's happening here," the security guard whispered, her professional training warring with the evidence of her own eyes. Zara didn't understand it either, but she was beginning to trust something deeper than understanding. "My daughter has never done anything like this before," she said quietly, never taking her eyes off Arya. "But I think she knows something we don't." The crowd around them had grown larger, but it had also grown quieter. People were no longer talking or pulling out their phones. They were all watching the impossible scene unfolding before them. A human baby, a bear cub, and a mother bear, somehow communicating across species in a way that defied every scientific explanation. Arya's song continued, rising and falling in gentle waves that seemed to wash over the entire terminal. And with each note, something amazing happened. The tension in the air began to dissolve. The mother bear's posture relaxed slightly, though she remained alert and protective. The cub on the carousel seemed to grow calmer, no longer struggling against its circular prison but simply accepting the motion while maintaining its focus on the baby. But then, just as Zara was beginning to believe that somehow everything might work out peacefully, a new complication arose that changed everything. An airport maintenance worker, apparently unaware of the delicate situation that was unfolding, approached Carousel 7 with a large tool bag and a determined expression. He had been called to fix a mechanical problem with the baggage system, and he was focused entirely on his job, not on the crowd of people watching a bear cub spin in endless circles. "Excuse me, folks," he said loudly, pushing through the crowd. "I need to get to the control panel. We've got reports of a malfunction on this carousel." "No, wait," Zara called out, but her voice was lost in the sudden movement as people shifted to let the worker through. The maintenance worker reached the control panel and began examining the switches and buttons, completely oblivious to the bear cub still riding the conveyor belt just a few feet away from him. He pulled a screwdriver from his tool bag and started working on a panel, making loud clanking noises that shattered the peaceful atmosphere that Arya's song had created. The effect on the animals was immediate and devastating. The bear cub, startled by the sudden noise and the presence of the unknown human so close to its moving prison, began to panic again. It started scrambling and crying, trying desperately to get away from the maintenance worker. But even worse was the reaction of the mother bear. The moment she saw a human approaching her cub with tools in his hands, every protective instinct in her massive body activated at once. She rose up on her hind legs, towering over everyone in the terminal, and let out a roar that made the windows shake. The maintenance worker finally looked up from his panel, saw the enormous bear standing less than 20 feet away from him, and dropped his screwdriver with a clatter that echoed through the terminal like a gunshot. Chaos erupted instantly. People began screaming and running in every direction. The security guards started shouting orders into their radios while trying to clear the area. Luggage carts were knocked over in the rush to escape, creating even more noise and confusion. But in the middle of all this panic, Zara made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of joining the crowd of people fleeing from the bears, she pushed Arya's stroller forward, closer to the carousel, closer to the danger. "What are you doing?" the security guard yelled, reaching out to stop her. "Trust me," Zara said, though she wasn't sure she trusted herself. "Arya, sweetheart, they need your help." The baby looked up at her mother with those impossibly bright blue eyes, and for a moment Zara saw something in them that looked almost like gratitude. Then Arya turned back toward the bears and began her song again, louder this time, more urgent but still filled with that strange, soothing melody. The mother bear, who had been advancing toward the maintenance worker with clear, aggressive intent, stopped in her tracks. Her massive head turned toward the sound of Arya's voice, and slowly, incredibly, she lowered herself back down to all four paws. The bear cub, still spinning on the carousel but no longer struggling in panic, began to make its own sounds in response to Arya's song. Not the desperate cries from before, but something that sounded almost like harmony. And then something happened that made everyone in the terminal stop running and turn back to watch. Something that would be talked about and shared and remembered for years to come. Other babies in the terminal began to respond to Arya's song. A toddler, being carried by his father, started humming along with the melody. A baby in a carrier began clapping her hands in rhythm with the music. Even some of the young children who had been crying in fear moments before grew quiet and turned toward the sound with wonder in their eyes. It was as if Arya's impossible song was awakening something primal and ancient in every young human within hearing distance, something that remembered what it meant to communicate with other living beings without words, without fear, with nothing but pure, innocent connection. The mother bear seemed to understand this too. She began walking again, but not toward the maintenance worker who was now crouched behind his tool cart in terror. Instead, she walked directly toward Zara and Arya, her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving the baby's face. The security guards raised their weapons, but the senior officer, a man with gray hair and kind eyes, held up his hand to stop them. "Wait," he said quietly. "Just wait and see what happens." 20 feet, 15 feet, 10 feet. The mother bear kept walking until she was close enough that Zara could see the individual hairs in her thick brown coat, could smell the wild scent of forest and earth that clung to her massive body. And then the bear did something that no one in that terminal would ever forget. She sat down, just like a dog might sit, and looked directly into Arya's eyes with an expression of such gentle intelligence that it took Zara's breath away. Arya stopped singing and reached out her tiny hand toward the enormous creature sitting just a few feet away from her stroller. The stuffed elephant that she had been holding fell to the floor, forgotten, as she stretched her fingers toward the bear's massive nose. For a moment that felt like forever, the baby's hand and the bear's nose were almost touching, separated by just a few inches and a lifetime of evolutionary differences. And in that moment, Zara realized that her daughter was about to do something that would either be the most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed or the last thing she would ever see. The carousel continued to spin, carrying the bear cub in its endless circle, but somehow that didn't seem important anymore. What mattered was this moment, this impossible connection between her baby daughter and a wild animal that should have been dangerous, but instead seemed to understand something about love and family that most humans had forgotten. But just as Arya's fingertips were about to make contact with the mother bear's nose, a new sound filled the terminal that changed everything once again. The wail of sirens, lots of them, getting closer by the second. Animal control had arrived, along with what sounded like half the police force in the city, and Zara knew that in a matter of minutes, this delicate, magical moment would be shattered by tranquilizer darts and capture nets, and all the fear-based responses that humans used when they encountered something they didn't understand. The mother bear heard the sirens too, and her entire body tensed with the knowledge of what they meant. She looked from Arya to the carousel where her cub was still spinning, then toward the entrance where the sound of heavy boots and urgent voices was getting louder. She had to make a choice, just like Zara had made a choice moments before. Stay and risk capture, or run and leave her cub behind. And as the first uniformed officers appeared at the edge of the baggage claim area, Arya made a choice too. She opened her mouth and spoke her second word, clear and unmistakable, and filled with more emotion than any 6-month-old should have been capable of expressing. "Stay," she said, looking directly into the mother bear's eyes. And incredibly, impossibly, the bear listened. The massive animal remained perfectly still, her dark eyes fixed on Arya's face as if she was trying to memorize every detail of the tiny human who had just spoken to her in a language that transcended words. The sirens were getting louder now, echoing through the terminal like an approaching storm, but the mother bear didn't move. She had made her choice, trusting in something that defied every survival instinct she possessed. The first wave of uniformed officers burst through the entrance doors, their heavy boots thundering across the polished floor. They moved with military precision, spreading out to surround the baggage claim area while barking orders into their radios. Behind them came the animal control team, carrying tranquilizer guns and thick nets, their faces set with grim determination. "Everyone back!" shouted the lead officer, a tall man with a commanding presence. "We have a dangerous animal situation. All civilians need to evacuate immediately." But the crowd that had gathered around Carousel 7 didn't move. They couldn't move. They were all mesmerized by what they were witnessing. A moment so extraordinary that leaving felt like abandoning something sacred. Zara felt her heart racing as she realized the impossible position they were all in. The officers couldn't see what she could see from her vantage point. They couldn't see the gentleness in the mother bear's eyes, or the way she was carefully keeping her massive body positioned between the approaching humans and the baby. not as a threat but as a shield. All they could see was a wild animal that had somehow gotten into an airport terminal, and their training told them that meant immediate danger. "Please," Zara called out to the lead officer, her voice carrying across the tense space. "She's not aggressive. She's just trying to protect her cub." The officer's eyes found Zara and the stroller, and his expression shifted from professional authority to genuine concern. "Ma'am, you need to get your baby away from that animal right now. Bears are unpredictable, and with her cub in distress, she could attack without warning." But even as he spoke, something was happening that made his words seem hollow. The bear cub on the carousel, perhaps sensing the arrival of the rescue team, had started making a new sound. Not the panicked crying from before, or the gentle harmony it had shared with Arya's song, but something that sounded almost like laughter. The small animal had figured out how to surf the moving conveyor belt, riding it like a slow-motion wave while maintaining perfect balance. As it passed by the crowd for what felt like the 100th time, the cub actually seemed to be enjoying itself, turning its small head to look at each face in the crowd as if it was performing for them. Several people in the crowd began to smile despite the tension, and a few even started to chuckle at the cub's unexpected display of playfulness. The sound of human laughter mixed with the cub's joyful noises created an atmosphere that was completely at odds with the serious nature of the situation. The mother bear heard her cub's happy sounds, and for the first time since entering the terminal, she relaxed completely. Her massive shoulders dropped, her breathing became slower and deeper, and she actually turned her head to watch her baby's carousel performance with what could only be described as maternal pride. This was the scene that the animal control team encountered as they pushed through the crowd with their equipment ready. They had prepared for a dangerous rescue operation, but what they found was something closer to a circus act, with a baby bear putting on a show while its mother watched like a proud parent at a school play. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead animal behaviorist on the team, lowered her tranquilizer gun as she took in the extraordinary scene. She had been working with wild animals for over 20 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The bears weren't exhibiting any of the stress behaviors she would have expected from animals trapped in an unfamiliar environment. Instead, they seemed almost content. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered to her partner, Dr. James Rodriguez. "Look at their body language. They're not in distress anymore." Dr. Rodriguez nodded, his own professional confusion evident on his face. The mother should be agitated, aggressive, trying to get to her cub, but she's just sitting there like she's at a family picnic. Meanwhile, Arya had been watching the approaching rescue team with an expression that seemed far too knowing for a 6-month-old. As the animal control specialist got closer, she began to make a new sound. Not her mysterious song from before, but something that sounded almost like she was trying to explain something important to adults who weren't quite smart enough to understand. She pointed first at the mother bear, then at the cub on the carousel, then at herself. Her tiny voice babbling in what sounded like complete sentences, even though the words weren't quite forming properly. It was as if she was trying to tell them that everything was under control, that there was no danger here, only a family that needed to be reunited. Dr. Chen found herself drawn to the baby's earnest explanation. "Has she been communicating with the bears this whole time?" she asked Zara. "I know how it sounds," Zara replied, her voice filled with wonder and confusion in equal measure. "But yes, somehow she has been. They've been responding to her like they understand every word she's saying." The animal control team exchanged skeptical glances, but they couldn't argue with what they were seeing. The bears were calm, the crowd was calm, and somehow a human baby seemed to be at the center of it all, orchestrating a piece that shouldn't have been possible. But just as Dr. Chen was beginning to consider that maybe this situation could be resolved without tranquilizers or capture nets, a new complication arose that threatened to destroy the delicate balance that Arya had created. Airport security had finally managed to locate the power controls for the baggage carousel system, and without consulting anyone at the scene, they decided to shut down Carousel 7 to end what they saw as a dangerous situation. The conveyor belt ground to a halt with a mechanical screech that echoed through the terminal like fingernails on a chalkboard. The bear cub, caught mid-stride in its playful surfing routine, tumbled forward and rolled into a pile of luggage with a surprised yelp. The effect on the mother bear was instantaneous and terrifying. She rose to her full height, towering over everyone in the area, and let out a roar that was louder and more threatening than anything she had produced before. This wasn't the protective warning from earlier. This was the sound of a mother who believed her child was in immediate danger. The crowd scattered in all directions, people screaming and pushing as they tried to get away from the massive animal that had suddenly transformed from a gentle giant into a force of nature. The animal control team raised their weapons, their fingers moving toward triggers as they prepared to sedate a bear that was now exhibiting exactly the kind of aggressive behavior they had been trained to handle. But in the chaos and panic that followed the carousel's sudden stop, everyone missed the most important detail of all. Arya wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming like the other children in the terminal. Instead, she was reaching out toward the mother bear with both hands, her face filled not with fear, but with an expression of deep, heartbreaking sadness. She could feel the bear's pain as if it was her own. She understood that the massive animal wasn't angry. She was terrified that she was about to lose her baby, just like any mother would be in the same situation. And as the tranquilizer darts were being loaded and the capture nets were being prepared, Arya did something that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. She began to cry. Not the normal cry of a baby, but the sound of pure, devastating grief. It was the cry of someone who understood loss and separation and the terrible fear of being helpless to protect the ones you love. The sound cut through the chaos like a knife, so raw and emotional that it stopped everyone in their tracks. The mother bear's roar faded into silence. The animal control team hesitated with their weapons half raised. Even the panicking crowd slowed their desperate flight to turn back toward the source of that heartbreaking sound. In that moment of sudden stillness, Dr. Chen made a decision that would either save the day or end her career. She set down her tranquilizer gun and walked directly toward the mother bear, her hands empty and visible, her voice calm and soothing. "It's okay, Mama," she said softly, using the same tone she might use with a frightened child. "We're going to help you get to your baby. Nobody's going to hurt either of you." The bear looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of wildness and wisdom, and something passed between them that transcended the barrier between human and animal. The massive creature sat back down, her gaze moving from Dr. Chen to Arya and back again, as if she was trying to decide whether these strange, hairless creatures could be trusted with the most precious thing in her world. And then, just as the situation seemed to be stabilizing once again, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air outside the terminal. The local news stations had gotten word of the bear attack at the airport, and they were arriving in force, bringing with them a level of media attention that would turn this private moment of magic into a public spectacle. But they weren't the only ones coming. Through the terminal's large windows, Zara could see more vehicles arriving, official-looking cars and trucks with government plates. Someone had decided that this situation was too unusual, too unexplainable to be handled by local authorities alone. Whatever happened next, Zara realized that their lives would never be the same. The quiet, ordinary existence she had planned for herself and Arya was about to be replaced by something much more complicated and potentially dangerous. Because in a world where most people believed that humans and animals could only communicate through fear and dominance, a baby who could speak to bears in their own language was either a miracle or a threat. And Zara was about to find out which one the rest of the world would decide her daughter was. The helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures, their rotors creating a thunderous noise that vibrated through the terminal's glass walls. Zara could see camera crews setting up their equipment just outside the building, reporters speaking urgently into microphones while pointing toward the baggage claim area, where the impossible drama was still unfolding. Inside the terminal, the government vehicles had disgorged a team of people who looked nothing like the local police or animal control officers. These were federal agents, dressed in dark suits despite the chaos around them, moving with the kind of quiet authority that suggested they dealt with unusual situations on a regular basis. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair, approached Dr. Chen with credentials that she flashed quickly before tucking them back into her jacket. "Dr. Chen, I'm Agent Sarah Martinez with the Department of Unusual Phenomena. We need to discuss what's happening here." Dr. Chen looked up from where she was still sitting peacefully near the mother bear, her professional world suddenly expanding in ways she had never imagined. "Department of what now?" "We'll explain everything later," Agent Martinez said, her gaze shifting to take in the entire scene. The calm mother bear, the bear cub that was now sitting contentedly on the motionless carousel, and most importantly, the baby in the stroller who seemed to be at the center of it all. "Right now, we need to ensure everyone's safety while we figure out exactly what we're dealing with." But even as she spoke, something new was happening that made everyone realize the situation was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Other animals were beginning to appear in the terminal. It started with a small flock of sparrows that somehow found their way inside through the automatic doors. Instead of flying around in panic as birds normally would in an enclosed space, they landed on the floor near Aria's stroller and began chirping in what sounded almost like a chorus, their tiny voices harmonizing with the gentle sounds the bear cub was making. Then came a stray dog, a golden retriever mix that must have wandered away from its owner in the parking lot. The animal walked calmly through the crowd of humans and law enforcement officers, completely ignoring everyone except Aria. It sat down next to the stroller and looked up at the baby with the same expression of peaceful attention that the mother bear had shown. "This is impossible, Doctor," Rodriguez whispered, watching as more animals began to arrive. A pair of pigeons roosting in the terminal's rafters flew down to join the sparrows. A service cat that lived in the airport's administration offices appeared from somewhere deep in the building and made its way directly to the growing circle around Aria. The animals weren't random strays drawn by curiosity. They were coming with purpose, as if they had been called by something that only they could hear. And once they arrived, they all exhibited the same strange behavior: complete calmness, focused attention on the baby, and what appeared to be genuine communication with both Aria and the two bears. Agent Martinez spoke rapidly into a small communication device, her voice low but urgent. "Command, we have a situation that's escalating beyond our initial parameters. We're going to need the full team down here, and probably Dr. Elizabeth Reeves from the Interspecies Communication Project." Zara heard the agent's words and felt a chill run down her spine. Her daughter wasn't just having an unusual interaction with a couple of bears anymore. Somehow, Aria had become the center of something that was attracting animals from throughout the airport and beyond. And now there were government agents with acronyms and departments she had never heard of taking an official interest in her 6-month-old baby. "What's happening to my daughter?" Zara asked, her voice carrying more authority than she felt. What do all these people want with her? Agent Martinez turned to look at her directly for the first time, and Zara saw something in the woman's eyes that was part professional interest and part genuine concern. Mrs. Mitchell. Zara Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell, has Arya ever exhibited any unusual behaviors before today? Any interactions with animals that seemed beyond normal infant responses? Zara thought back over the past 6 months, trying to remember anything that might have seemed significant at the time. She's always been very alert, she said slowly. More aware of her surroundings than other babies her age, and she does seem to respond to animals more than most children do. Our cat at home follows her everywhere, like it's protecting her. But I thought that was just normal pet behavior. What about her development? Has she reached any milestones earlier than expected? She spoke her first words today, Zara admitted, though saying it out loud made it sound even more incredible than it had felt in the moment. 2 words, actually. Mama and stay. She said them to the bears, and they listened to her. Agent Martinez nodded, as if this information confirmed something she had already suspected. Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand that what your daughter is doing here isn't just unusual. It's unprecedented. We've been tracking similar phenomena for several years now, but we've never seen anything quite like this. Before Zara could ask what other phenomena they had been tracking, a commotion near the terminal entrance drew everyone's attention. More animals were arriving, but these weren't strays from the immediate area. Someone was leading a group that included what appeared to be several dogs, a few cats, and even a small pig on a leash. The person leading this unusual parade was a young man in his 20s with kind eyes and clothing that suggested he worked with animals professionally. He approached the security perimeter that had been established around the Carousel area, but instead of being stopped by the officers, he was waved through after showing some kind of identification. That's Marcus Webb, Agent Martinez explained to Dr. Chen. He works at the city zoo. We called him in when we realized we might need someone with extensive animal handling experience. Marcus made his way through the crowd to where Dr. Chen was still sitting near the mother bear. The animals he had brought with him immediately joined the growing circle around Arya, adding their voices to what was becoming an increasingly complex chorus of sounds. Dr. Chen, Marcus said, his voice filled with amazement. I've never seen anything like this. Every animal at the zoo started acting strange about an hour ago. They all began moving toward the section of their enclosures that faces this direction, and they've been making sounds I've never heard before. When we got the call about what was happening here, it all started to make sense. But it didn't make sense to Zara, who was watching her baby daughter become the focal point of what was beginning to look like some kind of interspecies conference. Arya seemed completely comfortable with all the attention, babbling happily to each new animal that arrived and somehow managing to communicate with all of them simultaneously. The bear cub had climbed down from the carousel and was now sitting directly in front of Arya's stroller, close enough that the baby could reach out and touch its fur if she wanted to. The mother bear had positioned herself like a guardian, watching over both her own cub and the human baby with equal protective intensity. Agent Martinez, Dr. Chen said, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. In all your experience with unusual phenomena, have you ever seen anything that might explain how a 6-month-old human baby can communicate with wild animals? Agent Martinez was quiet for a long moment, watching as Arya reached out to gently pet the bear cub's head while making soft cooing sounds that the small animal seemed to understand perfectly. There are theories, she said finally. Research that suggests some humans might retain abilities that our species lost thousands of years ago when we became more dependent on language and technology. The ability to communicate through emotion and intention rather than words. But a baby? Dr. Rodriguez interjected. How could an infant have abilities that trained behaviorists don't possess? Maybe that's exactly why she has them, Marcus suggested, his voice thoughtful. Maybe it's because she hasn't learned yet that it's supposed to be impossible. As if to prove his point, Arya suddenly reached into her diaper bag and pulled out a small container of baby food that her mother had packed for the flight. She held it up toward the bear cub, babbling something that sounded remarkably like, "Hungry?" The cub sniffed the container and made a small sound that any parent would have recognized as, "Yes, please." Zara found herself automatically opening the container and offering it to the small bear, as if feeding wild animals to her baby was the most natural thing in the world. But as the cub began eating from the tiny spoon that Arya held out to it, the implications of what was happening began to sink in for everyone watching. This wasn't just communication across species barriers. This was the beginning of something that could change the way humans understood their relationship with the natural world. And then, just as the moment was reaching a peak of wonder and possibility, the sound of approaching vehicles outside grew louder and more urgent. Through the terminal windows, everyone could see a convoy of black SUVs pulling up to the entrance, followed by what appeared to be military transport trucks. Agent Martinez's communication device crackled to life with an urgent message that made her face go pale. Command to Field Team Alpha. We have confirmation of similar events occurring simultaneously in at least 6 other locations worldwide. Authorization has been granted for Protocol 7 implementation. Repeat, Protocol 7 is now in effect. Dr. Chen had no idea what Protocol 7 meant, but the expression on Agent Martinez's face suggested it wasn't good news for anyone involved, especially for Arya. "What's Protocol 7? Zara demanded, her maternal instincts flaring as she saw the change in the agent's demeanor. "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Martinez said, her voice taking on an official tone that hadn't been there before. "I'm going to need you and Arya to come with us, for your own safety and for the safety of everyone else involved in this situation." "Come with you where?" Zara's voice rose with panic as she realized that this was no longer about helping some lost bears find their way home. This was about her daughter, about abilities that Arya possessed that were apparently significant enough to warrant protocols and military involvement. The mother bear sensed the change in the human's emotional energy and rose to her feet, her massive body tense with new alertness. The other animals in the circle around Arya began making agitated sounds, as if they too understood that something threatening was approaching. But most telling of all was Arya's reaction. For the first time since this extraordinary day had begun, the baby looked frightened. She reached out toward her mother with tears forming in her bright blue eyes and made a sound that was unmistakably a plea for protection. In that moment, Zara realized that whatever was coming through those terminal doors was going to change their lives forever, and she wasn't sure if anyone, human or animal, was going to be safe once it arrived. The bear cub pressed closer to Arya's stroller, as if trying to offer comfort to the human baby who had shown such kindness to it and its mother. The mother bear positioned herself between the approaching threat and both cubs, because that's what Arya had become to her, another cub to protect. And as the automatic doors slid open to admit whatever Protocol 7 entailed, everyone in that terminal understood that they were about to witness either the beginning of a new chapter in human-animal relations, or the end of something magical that they had been privileged to experience for just a few precious hours. But before anyone could discover which it would be, Arya did something that surprised even the people who thought they were beginning to understand her abilities. She spoke her third word, and this time it wasn't directed at the animals around her, or even at her mother. She looked directly at Agent Martinez and said, clear as day, no. The single word hung in the air like a challenge, spoken with such clarity and authority that it seemed impossible it had come from a 6-month-old baby. But everyone in the terminal had heard it, and the effect was immediate and extraordinary. Every animal in the circle around Arya's stroller responded as if they had been waiting for that exact command. The mother bear rose to her full height, but not in aggression, in protection. The dogs positioned themselves between the approaching agents and the baby. The cats arched their backs, the birds spread their wings, and even the small pig stepped forward with surprising determination. But most remarkably of all, they weren't acting like individual animals defending territory. They were moving like a coordinated unit, like a family protecting one of their own. Agent Martinez stopped in her tracks, her professional composure shaken by the sight of a baby who was clearly communicating not just with animals but commanding their loyalty in ways that defied every scientific explanation she had ever learned. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said carefully, "we really do need to talk about your daughter's abilities. What she's doing here could have implications that extend far beyond this airport." But before Zara could respond, Arya spoke again. This time, her voice carried a melody that was hauntingly beautiful, like the song she had been singing earlier, but more complex, more purposeful. It wasn't quite human language, but it wasn't animal communication either. It was something else entirely, something that seemed to bridge the gap between species with pure emotion. As her voice rose and fell in patterns that touched something primal in every listener, something miraculous began to happen throughout the airport. The tension that had been building for hours began to dissolve. The police officers lowered their weapons without being ordered to do so. The animal control team set down their nets and tranquilizer guns. Even the federal agents found themselves relaxing, their mission suddenly seeming less urgent than the simple act of listening to this impossible child. Dr. Chen, who had been documenting the entire event in her mind for the scientific paper she knew she would never be able to publish, felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to Arya's song. In 20 years of working with animals, she had never experienced anything that came close to this moment of perfect understanding between humans and the natural world. Marcus Webb knelt down beside the bear cub, who had curled up peacefully next to Arya's stroller, and whispered, "She's trying to tell us something important, isn't she?" The cub looked up at him with eyes that seemed ancient and wise, and made a soft sound that Marcus somehow understood to mean yes. Zara, watching her daughter orchestrate this impossible piece, finally understood what had been happening all day. Arya wasn't just communicating with animals. She was reminding everyone present of something they had forgotten: the knowledge that all living beings were connected, that compassion and understanding could transcend the barriers that fear and ignorance had created. As Arya's song reached its crescendo, something even more extraordinary happened. The other children in the terminal, the ones who had been responding to her voice throughout the day, began to hum along with her melody. Toddlers and infants, children too young to have learned that talking to animals was impossible, added their voices to the chorus. And then, incredibly, some of the adults began to join in too. Not with words, because they didn't know the words, but with sounds that came from deep inside them, from a place that remembered what it felt like to be part of something larger than themselves. The song spread through the terminal like ripples on a pond, touching everyone it reached and leaving them changed. The harsh fluorescent light seemed softer. The cold, institutional space felt warmer. The fear and confusion that had defined the day transformed into something that could only be called love. Agent Martinez found herself humming along with the rest of them, her mission forgotten in the face of something that was far more important than any protocol. She looked around at her fellow agents, at the police officers, at the animal control team, and saw the same expression of wonder on every face. When Arya's song finally came to an end, the silence that followed was not empty, but full. Full of possibility, full of hope, full of the kind of understanding that changed people's lives forever. The baby looked around at all the humans and animals gathered in her presence and smiled. It was the smile of someone who had accomplished exactly what they had set out to do, even if they were too young to fully understand the magnitude of their achievement. Dr. Chen was the first to speak, her voice soft with awe. She wasn't trying to control the animals, she said. She was trying to teach us how to listen to them. Marcus nodded, still kneeling beside the bear cub. And they weren't just responding to her. They were trying to teach us too. Agent Martinez put away her communication device and approached Zara with an expression that was completely different from the official authority she had shown earlier. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think Protocol 7 might need to be rewritten. What your daughter has shown us today isn't a threat that needs to be contained. It's a gift that needs to be protected." The mother bear, sensing that the danger had passed, gently nuzzled her cub, and then, in a gesture that brought tears to every eye in the terminal, she approached Arya's stroller and touched her massive nose to the baby's tiny hand. Arya giggled with pure joy and patted the bear's nose as if she was petting the family cat. "Friend," she said, speaking her fourth word with the same clarity and confidence she had shown all day. And in that moment everyone present understood that they had witnessed something that would be remembered and talked about for generations, not as a strange incident or an unexplained phenomenon, but as the day a baby reminded the world that the barriers between species existed only in the minds of those who had forgotten how to listen with their hearts. As the news crews outside continued to report on the bear incident at the airport, the people inside knew they had experienced something far more significant. They had witnessed the birth of a new understanding, delivered by the most unlikely messenger possible, a 6-month-old child who spoke the language that all living beings shared, but most had forgotten how to use. The bears were safely returned to their forest home that evening, but not before the mother bear spent several more minutes with Arya, as if trying to memorize everything about the small human who had brought her family back together. The other animals gradually dispersed, returning to their normal lives but carrying with them the memory of perfect communication and understanding. Zara and Arya were allowed to continue their journey to Denver, but their lives were forever changed. Word of what had happened spread quietly through networks of people who understood that some miracles were too precious to be sensationalized. Researchers, animal behaviorists, and scientists from around the world reached out, not to study Arya like a specimen, but to learn from her gift. And Arya continued to grow and develop, always maintaining her special connection with the animal world, but also learning to navigate the human world with the same grace and wisdom she had shown that extraordinary day in the airport. Years later, when people asked Zara what it was like to be the mother of a child who could speak to animals, she would smile and say, "She doesn't speak to them, she listens to them, and then she teaches the rest of us how to listen too." Because that, in the end, was what the bear cub spinning on the airport baggage carousel had really been about. Not about a shocking incident or an unexplained phenomenon, but about a baby who reminded the world that love and understanding know no boundaries, and that sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest and most innocent among us. The stuffed elephant that had fallen to the terminal floor during those magical hours was returned to Arya, but she gave it to the local zoo to be placed in the bear habitat, a reminder of the day when two species reached across the divide and found each other in the most unexpected place. And whenever children visit that exhibit and ask why there's a stuffed elephant with the bears, the zookeepers tell them the story of Arya and the bear family, and how sometimes the most important conversations happen without words, in the language of kindness that every living creature understands. That is what the baby did that was truly shocking. She reminded an entire world how to love without fear, how to communicate without words, and how to see the sacred connection that exists between all living things, if only we remember how to listen with our hearts instead of our minds. And in a world that had forgotten so much about compassion and understanding, that was the most shocking thing of all.